The Heathrow Express or the Elizabeth line, which is best for travel between central London and Heathrow Airport? Well, today I'm going to be writing on both to compare the experience on board, as well as giving you a full comparison of the pros, the cons and the costs. I'd arrived into London on a day trip flight which I've done to earn status with British Airways. Make sure to watch my previous video to learn a bit more about that. And as I wanted to get into London as quick as possible to make the most of my time today, I opted to start with the Heathrow Express. Now that being said, there's no guarantees that the Heathrow Express will get me into town first. Whilst it does boast a journey time of 15 minutes compared to the approximately 35 minutes on the Elizabeth line, whether or not it'll get you there first entirely depends on the timetable and what time you arrive. If you get to the platform when an Elizabeth line train is about to leave, and yet your Heathrow Express doesn't depart for 15 minutes, there's really not much in that journey time at all. To find both the Elizabeth line and the Heathrow Express, follow the signs in the airport for trains. Both platforms are right next to each other, and for both you can either pre-buy your ticket at the machine, or you can simply tap your way in with your credit card. However, I really wouldn't recommend either of those methods if you're taking the Heathrow Express. It's very expensive at £25 if you're buying it on the day, so you should really only get this if you're pre-ordering online. When pre-ordering, you only need to say a date, you don't need to say a time, so there's no risk of worrying about a late flight affecting your ticket. I'll tell you exactly how much I paid and how I did it a little bit later in the video. Once the train had arrived at the platform, there was still a bit of a wait before we were allowed on board. But thankfully the platform was quiet and it was no issue grabbing a seat whilst I waited. And after 5 or so minutes it was announced that we were now able to board. One of the first things I noticed was a generous luggage rack, and they had a bigger one at the other side of the carriage as well. Seats are configured in a bit of a mix. You get these chairs where there's 4 with 2 facing each other, which is quite handy if you're travelling as a family or as a big group. I decided to go for one of the seats that wasn't facing anyone. All of the seats that are by the windows have power outlets, and these ones have tray tables that fold down. Obviously the seats that face each other don't have that, instead they have a smaller tray with a couple of cup holders. There was plenty of legroom and there was additional storage for baggage above the seats. Wi-Fi was included, and it could easily be accessed via this QR code on the back of the seat. And it also takes you to a page where you get access to flight information, as well as access to some online versions of newspapers and magazines. Although I didn't personally bother with this, it was only a 15-minute journey, I had plenty to occupy myself without that. There were a few screens around the carriage with information about the journey, and I noticed that above the seats there were also individual reading lights. And at the end of the carriage there was also some basic toilet facilities. Like I said, it's only a 15-minute journey, but it is nice that that's provided. And this is something that you don't get if you're on the longer journey on the Elizabeth line. I made myself comfortable in the seat, and it wasn't too long before we were on our way. The Heathrow Express is sold as a direct route from Heathrow over to Paddington Station with no stops. However, if you did board at T5, there will be a brief stop at Terminals 2 and 3 to collect additional passengers, but from there it's direct to Paddington. It was a comfortable journey and it went by very fast, but how fast exactly was it? So as I said, they do say it's a 15-minute journey. From Terminal 5 today though, it was exactly 20 minutes. So if you arrive at the platform in T5 just before it departs, that's how long it'll take you to get through to Paddington. Now obviously I arrived at the platform quite a bit of time before it departed. When I first got there was about a 5-minute wait for the train to arrive, and then it was a further 10 minutes before the train departed. I was able to use the timestamps on the video, so I was able to see it was 16 minutes from when I arrived to when that train departed. So total time for me today was 36 minutes to get to central London. Now when I got to the platform, there was an Elizabeth line train that had been about to depart, so if I had actually got on that one, chances are I would have actually arrived in Paddington at about the same time. So let's head over to the Lizzie line and see how that compares. This is nice and easy to find at Paddington Station, very well signposted, and it's just outside the main station area. At the bottom of the escalator there are ticket machines and timetables. Looking at the boards when I got down there, I could see that the next departure to Heathrow Terminal 5 wasn't for another 25 minutes unfortunately, so I timed it pretty poorly. I just tapped in with my credit card. There were ticket machines there like I said, but there's no actual advantage to prepaying with the Elizabeth line. The cost is £12.20 for the journey, but that does factor into the Transport for London daily cap, so if you are taking other Transport for London services, whether that's buses or the Underground, that also counts towards that, so your fare may actually end up being free if you've already done quite a lot of travel during that day. So yeah, quite a long wait at the platform for my train to arrive. Unfortunately there weren't really many seats available on the platform either, just a couple that were reserved for people with disabilities or people who needed that seat. But eventually it did arrive and I was able to get on board. And the seating arrangements on this are a bit mixed throughout the carriages, so there's sections where you've got 4 seats facing each other, and other sections where you have seats in rows up against the wall, more similar to what you'd see on the tube. There are a couple of USB charging points by my seat, but it's worth noting this isn't by every seat, so it's not as common as what you have on the Heathrow Express, but there are the odd places where you can charge things. Plenty of standing space available and rails to hang on to, and you've got the small screen there displaying information about the upcoming stops. Now, unlike the Heathrow Express, the Elizabeth line has multiple stops along the way. It's not a direct route, and there's pros and cons to that. If you live somewhere at one of the stops along that line, it's obviously a lot more convenient for you getting to and from the airport, or if you're just staying at somewhere that's along one of those stops. You know, the Heathrow Express only goes to Paddington, but if that's not where you're trying to get to, you might have to go out of your way to get to and from Paddington. And it did seem like the majority of commuters on this line were not going to the airport. It was a very busy train when I first got on. I wasn't really able to film too much initially, but as we went from stop to stop, it got quieter and quieter, and there were only a handful of people left by the end. I think potentially at times it could be a struggle with a lot of luggage. If you're on one of the really busy trains, there aren't any luggage racks, so you would have your luggage with you, so you would really rely on it being a bit quieter. Thankfully there is a lot of standing space, so you can have your case there, but it just might mean that you stood up with that for a while. I think ultimately the Elizabeth line just feels like a bit of an extension of the London Underground. You know, it really does feel like you're on the tube, but it's nice. You know, as someone who's got the tube over to the city centre a few times from Heathrow, it's always packed out, really hot, you've got no space, so the experience on the Elizabeth line is a vast improvement on that. If you're just doing that journey on its own, it is a little bit pricey at £12.20, but if you're going to be connecting onwards anyway, it might end up not costing much due to the daily cap. But for me personally, the Heathrow Express was actually cheaper. Now, I'd pre-booked online when there was an offer going to get a ticket for £10. But I also had an offer on my Amex card at the time to get 10% off on the Heathrow Express, so that brought my total ticket cost down to £9, so £3.20 cheaper than the Elizabeth line was. I think if you are able to pre-book at a rate like that, it's an absolute no-brainer. If it's cheaper than the Lizzie line, and you've got a nicer seat, better features, I'd say definitely go for that. But if you can't find a good rate to pre-book, or if you're not in that big a rush, or if you don't have huge amounts of baggage, then I think the Elizabeth line is a perfectly good way of getting into the city centre and not needing to be pre-booking anything, so you can just be flexible, and especially if you do think you will use the tube later that day, or any of the buses, then it's definitely the choice to go for. Lastly, I just wanted to mention as well that the Heathrow Express does have a business first class option, which I haven't tried yet. The price of that one is £32, and I think I'd have a real hard time justifying it, to be honest. The normal Heathrow Express is absolutely fine. I wouldn't really need anything more than that, and when the journey time's only 15 to 20 minutes, I can't see any value in upgrading. However, there are some flight statuses that will get you an upgrade to that for free, for example if you're gold guest list with BA. But yeah, if you have tried business first class, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Was it worth it? If so, why? I hope you found that useful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.